So I finally got to see Shin Ultraman in an honest-to-God theater, and if you're just interested in my review of the movie, just use the chapters or go to this timecode. I previously talked about how I really went to see Shin Ultraman in a theater, but it turned out to only be at the Fantasia Film Festival in North America, which is in Canada. I don't know if this was announced after I was doing research, or if I just happened to miss it, but somebody commented and let me know that Shin Ultraman was also going to have a showing at the New York Asian Film Festival in New York City. Now, driving up to Canada to see it at Fantasia was just not going to happen. But New York, on the other hand, happens to be about 3 hours away from me if traffic isn't too heavy. So that was totally doable. This being the first US screening with director Shinji Higuchi and producer Tomoya Nishino. So thank you very much to Interweb Kaiju for the heads up, and please go check out his content if you get a chance. I took a couple people to the screening with me. My partner Brienne, who only knows Tokusatsu and Ultraman by dinner conversations and seeing Shin Godzilla in the theater. She's great at filtering this through like a beginner's perspective that doesn't have any real passion for Tokusatsu. Also along for the ride is my friend Truman, who doesn't follow Tokusatsu very closely but is into Evangelion and other works by Anno Hideaki, who wrote the movie, and also watched a decent amount of Ultraman where you could find it growing up, who works well adjacent to me, who's been diving into Tokusatsu really heavily over the last few years, making me kind of the ideal viewer. If you'd like to see our immediate first impressions, please click wherever that's popping up right now or subscribe to the channel. So we all loaded up into a car and took a drive to New York, with a quick breakfast break at Royal Farms, where we got to meet this big chicken, and Truman trash talked me for getting a Nitro Pepsi.
I'm a hater. I'm real good at it.
Then it was back on the road to New York. And of course, as soon as we got through the Lincoln Tunnel, my car had a sensor issue and dropped dead right in the middle of a busy intersection. So that was cool. So we were able to get the car going again and then parked in one of the most confusing parking garages I've ever been in and paid $50. Welcome to New York. But we eventually made our way to the theater to see the movie, where we got a couple of cool hollow foil postcards and these posters that I'm pretty sure are from the Ultraman Rising events a few weeks ago. There's a quick introduction to the movie discussing how Shin Ultraman is the most successful Japanese film of 2022 so far, and of course is one of the most popular Ultraman movies to ever be released out of about 37. Then Shinji Higuchi jumped on stage, thanked everyone for being there, and apologized in advance since this was the first US showing, because Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman tend to not view Americans in the most positive light. So take that however you will. And then we just got to watch the movie. And before I really get into my thoughts on Shin Ultraman, I just want to point out that my experience is probably a little skewed due to the environment I saw the movie in. I watched this in a theater full of Ultraman fans. People wearing Ultraman hats, people wearing Ultraman shirts, people wearing EVA gear, Studio Kara stuff. Basically, this was a theater of nerds who cheered at the smallest homage of things, and it was a pretty electrifying environment to watch something in. So I don't think there's really any way for that not to have colored my experience. And honestly, if you're an Ultraman fan, you're probably already going to see this when it comes out, regardless of what I have to say about it. Last thing before I get into it, this is a mostly spoiler-free discussion, and if things like what monsters appear in the movies is something that's going to upset you, then please just wait for this to come out, have a fresh experience, and come back and watch this. So the movie, I think it was good. I will say it's very information dense, and the dialogue comes at like a really quick pace. And trying to understand all the small details of what was occurring in the beginning was really confusing. I think I got the big ideas, but there's just a lot of really quick snippets to kind of explain how the world starts. And during that beginning, it's just chocked full of nods to Ultra Q that are really awesome as an Ultra fan. But Kaiju are attacking Japan, leading to the creation of the SSSP, a government body that's been put together to understand and help fight against Kaiju. The first Kaiju you end up seeing are considered an S-class, or basically like a beastly animal. The first one you see is the only one I'm really going to talk about, but that's Naranga. He's basically a really simple animal operating off base instincts. I think this take on Kaiju works really well to help ground the movie. In traditional TV Ultraman shows, the villains are kind of falling into this like WrestleMania scope. Like, we might be explained what they're after, but they don't act like animals. They act like a big costumed monster that's getting ready to have a wrestling match. And don't get me wrong, that's absolutely what I love about kaiju movies. But here with a more serious tone, I think it really helps to emphasize that these are animals at the end of the day. There's a cool moment where Naranga comes in contact with Ultraman and is going into defense mode, but upon investigating, he's sensing the ability and becomes afraid knowing that Ultraman could hurt or ultimately kill him. So he pulls back like a scared animal that's ready to lash out. So he backs up slowly onto a mountain and goes invisible, attempting to camouflage in as a form of defense. It's not just monsters fighting or going after a resource. I really love seeing some of the kaiju have self-preservation instincts kicking in, attempting to shield themselves. Because they're animals, it's just acts of survival because humans have destroyed the earth and brought them to life. The SSSP are struggling to stop a kaiju when Ultraman shows up, shoots a beam and utterly destroys the kaiju and decimates the land around it, setting off an intergalactic arms race for Ultraman's power. The plot continues to grow with the introduction of more extraterrestrial life forms, as they start to have smarter plots and smarter endgames and different methods of trying to take over the Earth in different ways. That brings me to my love-hate relationship with the movie and its plot. It's a movie and not a TV show, and it, for the most part, stays focused on the main characters. But the bigger picture conflicts kind of lean into the episodic nature of what Ultraman ultimately is. And in some ways, I did find this to work. It creates really good world building because you're introduced to all these monsters and aliens, and it creates a really rich tapestry to understand that, hey, this is a whole world, this is a whole universe here, and we're getting to take a glimpse as part of it with the birth of Ultraman. However, that's also a deterrent because you don't get to focus in on one big story, so a lot of the mechanics of how things work kind of get brushed away. You'll understand how the transformation works with the beta capsule, but it starts to introduce more concepts of like the land of light and that there's more ultra beings out there, but they all tend to come in these big exposition dumps. And they can be incredibly hard to keep up with, taking away from elements of the main plot, making a lot of the information you receive feel really convoluted. There's no main villain of this story, and I think it was made that way in order to weave itself into the narrative, to show that there's always a threat that wants to seize power. Your defenses can never rest, and although humanity is ultimately destructive, life is also precious and worth protecting. But that doesn't give you a central villain, which makes it feel like there's no central conflict. Just a constantly escalating series of bads, and bigger bads. There are times where they introduce a new conflict and your brain's still thinking about the old one, wondering when that's going to wrap up, but then you realize Ultraman killed it, it's done. That's the end of that particular conflict. From aliens that want to control disinformation, to extraterrestrials that want to ensnare humans as wholesale resources to the rest of the galaxy. One villain's plot quickly moves into the next, leaving the main characters in the middle, figuring out where the truth is and how to navigate it. All the way emphasizing how small and insignificant human lives are when you zoom out the human experience on a macro level. But all the aliens are really enriched and fun, they just don't mold into that story. At the same time, you really like all of the primary cast of the movie. It's really fun to see them interact and grow. And with that, there's a bar scene in the middle that is one of my favorite character moments I think I've ever seen cinematically. If you've been waiting for this movie, then you already know that the decision was made to forego traditional tokusatsu suits in favor of digital designs. For a Japanese movie that's made with a limited release, this is some of the best digital design I've ever seen. Most of the kaiju feel really fleshed out and real. I particularly like the intro where you get like a spattering of different monsters and how they were defeated. The interpretation of Ultraman comes off as really interesting to me. When I see Ultraman out of context, it almost feels like he's too shiny to fit into the world that he's in. But the way the movie introduces him in with organic and digital elements, it really welcomes you in and kind of invites your brain to forget that there's nothing really on the screen. And you definitely lose something by not having a physical object being filmed, but you also get much more visceral fight scenes. From unnatural humanoid flying and flips, to the fast-paced grappling scenes. Most of the fight scenes really take hold. It was really incredible to be able to watch this in a theater with a full sound system, subwoofers and sound all around you to really make you feel the destruction that the kaiju can have. And as long as it's Ultraman fighting a kaiju, I think it really lands. But when it shifted to Ultraman fighting things that were a little more bipedal, it started to feel a little more lost in its visual. There were a lot of the bigger creatures that felt a little incomplete to me. I particularly struggled with Mephiles. He has a slim build that feels really reminiscent of an Eva from Evangelion, but something about the way it moves doesn't feel like it works the way it should. And what I feel like should have been one of the best fight scenes of the movie kinda left me a little unsatisfied. Shin Ultraman was written by Anno Hideaki and directed by Shinji Higuchi, and I think it shows. I tend to really like everything I've seen from Shinji Higuchi as a director. These visuals and the way the scenes mechanically work I think are really solid. And from a base story perspective, there are things that just scream Anno. His hallmarks are just all over this movie. And if those are the types of themes that you typically go towards, I don't think you'll be disappointed, but you may be a little confused. One of the things that I was caught really off guard on is the amount of comedy in this movie. It was just genuinely really funny. At least while I was there sitting in the theater, a lot of the jokes that were told really landed for me. There are some weird, quirky fan service moments, but there's a lot of genuinely funny commentary on modern life. Shin Godzilla was played really seriously in the same way that a worldwide nuclear crisis would call for. But Shin Ultraman is not about a nuclear crisis. This is a fantasy tokusatsu movie. It's serious when it needs to be, but still allows itself to have fun. I wouldn't compare it to a Marvel movie or anything like that. Like, it's not afraid to make sure the end of every scene has a joke. It's not afraid to hold on to a serious tone, but it does take the chance to smirk at the audience whenever it can. And overall, if you're a tokusatsu fan, I think this movie's a no-brainer. There's no current announcement of this movie getting a larger distribution or release in the US, but I'm pretty confident it's going to find its way here sooner than later. However, if you're just a casual movie fan, or just someone who wants to watch a fantasy superhero film about bureaucracy on the world stage, it's not as easy to recommend. It does have its own value outside of being a tokusatsu movie, and I do think a general audience could have a lot of fun with this movie. I can easily see a whole generation of people having this be their introduction to Ultraman and just falling in love. It just doesn't bring it all home the way I kind of wish it did. Without a bigger central conflict, I just feel like it doesn't have enough for the characters to make this a truly engaging story. In the end, it's a cool movie with flaws, so if you're coming to have a good time, you're gonna find it. After the movie, I got to listen to a Q&A with Higuchi and Tomoya. There was a couple of really cool things said. One of the things I found the most notable is that Shin Godzilla had an incredibly rushed production timeline. They were in competition with the Legacy Pictures Godzilla movie, and contractually it needed to be released before that came out, causing everything to be incredibly stressful and rushed. While during the filming of Ultraman, a certain pandemic happened, making its release day get moved farther and farther back. This allowed the team to work on the digital visuals until they were more satisfied with them. And that's the thing. This movie was really cared about. It has a lot of love in it, and that all really shines through. We live in incredibly uncertain times where it's so easy to get lost in the noise of day-to-day life, to lose sight of what's important and to feel insignificant and meaningless. For me, Shin Ultraman stood in front of melancholy, reminding me that sometimes the important parts in life are jumping into a car with a bunch of people you care about, driving a few hours to see a movie, and eat some ramen. I'm High C, and I hope you keep watching.